We need to buckle up, people, because this one's going to be rough. I want to ask the audience a question.
I fail to see the logic here. Is Senate the price to pay for power?
Is sanity the price to pay for power? And we're going to be trying to answer that question a bit later on. But there's a quick disclaimer I want to add, which is not quick. So about Sunak and Braverman using dog whistle racism and Braverman going to bat for the gollywog dole owners. Sunak said recently, for too long, he warned that, quote, political correctness has stopped us from weeding out vile criminals who prey on children and young women. Ellipses, we will stop at nothing to stamp out these dangerous gangs, end quote. This is a clear reference to the gangs in Rotherham, who people claim that the police did not investigate because the police did not want to be seen as racist. You can see that's the line that Sunak is taking. It's dog whistle racism. Directed to certain groups in the UK who will hear it, sort of like UKIP type voters, Reform UK type voters, even certain Labour voters in certain seats. And they will know what he's talking about. For people outside the UK, you might not get it. So at the risk of demonetization and YouTube being very angry at me, let me explain. So between the 1980s and the 2010 or the 2000s, in parts of the UK, there were rape gangs that were mainly made up of Pakistani descent. Perhaps the most well-known of these was based in Rotherham. The council and members of the police claimed they did not investigate or talk about the gangs for fear of being called racist. Some of that might be true, but I think it's also due to the victims being from deprived backgrounds. Some of them were in care, some of them had very precarious home lives, so the police could simply not be bothered. This is not to victim shame, because I think if the victims were mainly middle-class girls, then we would have seen the police take action far quicker when things came to light. What happened in these cities and these towns was an absolute tragedy. You know, girls were subjected to horrendous crimes and were not listened to when they complained, when they went to the police, when they went to their guardians. A double crime, the scale of which is not fully known even today. Some put the numbers in the thousands. We won't know the full scale because there was immense societal pressure placed on these girls to not say anything. This enabled the politicians and police to just ignore the victims in the hopes they would go away, but instead they made the problem worse, and they should, in my honest opinion, should have been arrested as well for being complicit in these crimes, for not doing their jobs. The Tories are using this to claim that the reason why some of these people got away with these crimes is due to political correctness. I don't think that is the case, not after these cases were found out anyways, because there was a bright light put onto these sorts of crimes. I believe that the main reason that people are getting away with these sorts of crimes today is that victims have a lack of faith and confidence in the system. The Tories have hollowed out the judiciary, the CPS, legal aid, pillars of the system that victims used to rely upon. That's something we need to discuss, because this should really have been the focus of the posters, attacking the party, not the man. So honestly, with only 1.6% of cases leading to charges, the Tories have really damaged the system here, and that should have been the focus. So let's talk about the actual posters. And I get that they're there for maximum shock value, but factually, they can only be described as questionable at best. So I wanted to add that disclaimer because people will claim I'm a Tory shill and blah, blah, blah. And I think it was important to explain the dog whistle because it feels like Labour have used it inadvertently, or maybe on purpose, I don't know. But this is the first poster on Twitter. You can see the caption goes, "Do you think adults convicted of sexually assaulting children should go to prison? Rishi Sunak doesn't." And then the poster says, "Under the Tories, 4,500 adults convicted of sexually assaulting children under 16 serve no prison time. Labour will lock up dangerous child abusers," based on Ministry Defence data produced by the Labour Party. And so if you are just listening to the video, I would advise you just check the video out and just have a look at this poster, just to get the full kind of scale of the situation. So, this is the first poster that Labour tweeted. On the face of it, it's a well-produced poster using Sunak's own style against him, which is a good idea because it looks sharp. I saw the poster, I was like, after a while of being angry, I was like, damn, that looks good in terms of the production value. But that's where the praise ends. Putting a person of South Asian descent onto a poster is a bit of a dog whistle given the fact that what happened in Rotherham and elsewhere, as I just mentioned, claiming he's a paedophile protector. given what we've said earlier about the political correctness. Like I said, I don't have sympathy for Sunak because he's fed into those dog whistles fairly recently. But subjecting him to the same thing makes no sense. And while I have heard people say, well, Sunak's Indian, not Pakistani, or of Indian descent, the issue is that the racist people can't tell the difference and don't care. People from the Indian subcontinent, or indeed often anyone that looks a certain way, are simply labelled as, quote, Pakis, end quote, to them. Just because Sunak's of Indian descent does not change that. Just like I'm of Bangladeshi descent, it doesn't change that. I do not believe that juxtapositioning of Sunak's image with the message was an intentional mistake. Unlike things Sunak and Braverman are doing, I believe it was not intentional. But honestly, as I will discuss later, someone at Labour HQ should have noticed this in the production of the poster. This was greenlit by two different divisions in the end. I've seen some disagreement on if the poster is a dog whistle. I think it is, but I can see why some people might not. But there are other reasons why the poster is a mistake. On a factual level, we'll discuss that. The secret barrister, who's an expert on law and has published books and other related things, said, idiotic line by Labour. Sunak and his party have devastated the criminal justice system through gleeful defunding of its constituent parts, causing record backlogs and delays of years, but he is not responsible for sentencing imposed in a relatively small number of cases, end quote. And I agree. The focus should have been on the breaking of the judiciary, the CPS, and a lack of legal aid. Heck, even the police need serious help and reforms to deal with these sorts of cases. Back in May 2021, there was a government commission report which said these sorts of cases. Back in May 2021, there was a government commission report that said that only 1.6% of rape or attempted rape perpetrators are charged by the CPS. Since 2010, the CPS has had its budget cut substantially by around 25% and has sustained a 30% reduction in staff, according to The Guardian. And that has not changed, that has not gone back up, and that's one of the main issues we're facing. Further, using the figures that Sunak does not think that these people convicted of sexually assaulting children should not get custodial sentences is questionable at best. There's a lot of context missing here in the Labour figures. Sentencing is down to judges, but the Labour Party won't commit to setting an absolute minimum sentence for people who have committed child sexual assault. In fact, according to the secret barrister, the overcrowding of prisons has little bearing on the sentencing, and that Labour would not commit to spending more to increase prison capacity regardless. Even the numbers on the poster may not be accurate. So it's going back to the secret barrister tweeting, quote, when the BBC sought clarification, Labour previously said the figure included sexual assault and sexual activity with a child, which makes it odd that Steve Reed kept turning the conversation back to child rapists. Intellectual honesty seems pretty thin on the ground, end quote. And when asked about the figures by the BBC, Reed said that they were the Ministry of Justice figures. But what happened is Steve Reed seems to have conflated two or more crimes with each other to get the figure that he got. I think that's something Labour will get pulled up on as well. How they got that number and how they did is open to attack because they really do not add up. You can't conflate multiple different crimes and put a poster up about it. It doesn't make sense. And I agree with Secret Barrister's analysis here. I think the issue is that Labour went for the shock value argument of saying this guy Sunak does not believe that violent criminals and people who abuse children should not go to prison, which again is a dumb thing to do because the arguments attack Sunak at his core, what he stands for as a man, as a person. It will be a hard argument to prove. You have to prove intent. Hence why I think Labour wanted to pivot straight away to the state of the judiciary and the CPS. But that's complicated and does not fit onto a snazzy poster. And when the argument centres on the toxicity of the poster, that takes away from their actual message. That's something we'll discuss later. So you can see from the first poster how bad the attack lines are, the dog whistles, the bad use of statistics, and finally the lack of Labour offering proper solutions, all of which make the entire thing kind of pointless. At least that's my view. This poster was the worst one, but let's look at the other two. So this one says, quote, do you think thieves should be punished? Rishi Sunak doesn't. Under the Tories, only 180 of the 4,500 thefts a day will see someone charged this year. Labour would put 13,000 more police and PCSOs on the street to keep our community safe and get justice for victims, end quote. And it's very snazzy. Again, I would have gone for a darker green, but that's just me. But again, there's no context to the statistics. Are these petty crimes or someone stealing items they need to live? We really don't know. but I guess it's there to shock people again, make the voters think the Tories don't want to criminalise theft. And again, it makes people question: are the Tories really the party of law and order? And this is the last one that we're going to discuss. There's a few more that they've released, but yeah, we'll just stick with these three. So this one says, quote, "Do you think an adult convicted of possessing a gun with intent to harm should go to prison? Rishi Sunak doesn't. Under the Tories, the 937 adults convicted of possession of a firearm with intent to harm serve no prison time. Labour will lock up dangerous gunmen," end quote. And this one, the secret barrister had an issue with the intent to harm bit. But I don't think that's too important for this conversation. And again, it's up to judges to decide. That's why you have minimum sentencing guidelines. Without Labour changing the sentencing guideline, nothing much will change. And we'll talk about the guideline stuff later because it's really stupid, honestly. The poster should have been focused more on how it was the Tories who broke the system. Further, Starmer really opened himself to being attacked on this one, since he was the head. He was the head of the Director of Prosecutions between 2008 and 2013. And this is where it got a bit dark under the Johnson period. Johnson once mentioned in PMQs that Starmer failed to prosecute Jimmy Savile. Jimmy Savile, a notorious paedophile for decades, but the police and the CPS failed to do anything. Starmer could be attacked on the grounds that, well, he was the head of the CPS. It was his fault that Savile was never prosecuted, and that is a vicious, vile smear. And I understand that this argument is complete bogus because Starmer was not the one who dealt with the actual case, and as the CPS kept saying, there was a lack of evidence to prosecute Savile, which I will be generous. I will take the CPS's word for it. But you can see how basic the argument is and how it can be used against Starmer. You were in charge of X did not happen, or you failed to do this thing, therefore that's your fault. But the argument is false, and according to Starmer himself, after Johnson said these smears, Starmer was accused of being a paedophile protector. So if people start saying this about Sunak, will Starmer jump for joy because the advert worked? Because if I was a person who claimed to be very angry at the way the smears made me feel, I would not go ahead and use those same sorts of smears on someone else. But maybe that's just me, or maybe sanity really is the price to pay for power, and we've answered our own question. You could argue that Sunak started the personal attack stuff by calling Starmer one of those lefty lawyers that stops the government from stopping the channel crossings. But Labour claims the last straw was when Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, claimed Labour-run councillors failed to act on the grooming gangs over fears they would be called racist, what we mentioned before. A Labour Party source said, quote, "That was the moment we decided to go for it," end quote. This is from the Telegraph. So the response to personal attacks and dog whistle racism and accusing Labour councils of failing to deal with rape gangs was to do dog whistle racism and personal attacks against the other side. This is Labour giving up the moral high ground here. You can't complain the Tories are playing dirty now and making things personal. It's only going to get worse from here, in my opinion. We will see it get worse. Labour basically admitted, in my opinion, that the posters were dog whistle racism when a Labour insider said, quote, "I don't accept it's dirty, I think it's bold. One of the reasons people react is because they don't expect it from us, but Braverman's dog whistle last week was accepted as par for the course," end quote. So whichever donor in the Labour Party said this, well done. You basically admitted to using dog whistle racism and then tried to claim it's only a problem when the other side do it, when the other side use smears. And I'm surprised that I'm not surprised that people like Braverman are racist. Braverman was called out by Baroness Warsi recently, and I give Baroness Warsi a lot of credit for that, and I really should have covered it, and I might still do that, honestly, because Braverman has been called out by more former Tory politicians. But I don't expect you, the Labour Party, to do this as well. That's the point. Yes, no one should be using racism of any kind. No one should be using smears, but you don't get a pass because the other side do it as well. What a clumsy, stupid statement. Is this the level of the talent in the Labour Party? Honestly, you're going for the old teacher, he's talking as well. God damn. Labour seemed to have convinced itself it needs to go viral in the ads and engagement and social media, despite having abysmal social media outreach. This is the first advert for Labour that's reached 20 million views and it's still going up, making it arguably their most successful Labour attack in recent memory in terms of viewership. A party insider said, quote, "Nice doesn't win elections. They have got used to Labour shirking the dirty stuff. That's changed," end quote. And it wasn't shared because it was a great attack ad and resonated with people. It was widely shared because it was widely condemned by even centrist and centre-left journalists. Share figures do not mean much when the impression people get of you is a bad one. If your first impression of someone are these posters, you're going to think this lot are a bunch of clowns. You won't win voters like that. But it gets weirder because on the one hand, they're celebrating the viewership numbers on the poster, while on the other hand, they claim, quote, "We aren't talking to Twitter. We are talking to the vast majority of the country who want to see child rapists locked up and know the Tories have destroyed the criminal justice system," end quote. And I think that most people agree child rapists, child sexual assaulters, people who commit sexual activity with children should be locked up for a long time. But the posters are not about child rapists. They're conflating different crimes with each other. These people are lost. There is no intellectual honesty here. They're obsessed with winning, but they don't know how to win. I think these sorts of personal attack ads will turn voters off, especially if both sides are at it. I'm still waiting for more polling data to come out on this. The only real difference is that mainly outside of the lefty lawyers jab, Sunak normally stays out of the nasty personal attacks, while Starmer has fully embedded himself in it this time. I think Labour attacks on the Tories have been largely ineffective, with their polling lead coming from the comical failures of the Tories, for Liz Truss and Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson, Partygate, failures on COVID, the Owen Paterson scandal, the Chris Pincher scandal, and Liz Truss, who imploded the economy. They made the Tory brand and the Tory party very toxic, but Sunak's approval ratings are still higher than Starmer's, and with Labour's polling lead slowly being eroded, I think Labour is desperate to find a way to get Sunak, to land something on him, and that's just my take. And if that is the case, then as a wise man once said, quote, "That's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him," end quote.
Each side is currently accusing the other of being paedophiles.
So I want to talk about the fallout from the posters. Yvette Cooper is clearly not a fan of the poster or the posters, or is hedging her bets because she distanced herself from the posters, with insiders saying she had nothing to do with them, and we're going to be discussing a briefing battle here. In fact, much of the shadow cabinet have distanced themselves from the posters, saying they were not consulted on them. Only Reid, whose team made the poster, along with Thornberry and Starmer, are aggressively defending them as far as I'm aware. Recently, a few shadow cabinet MPs have put out tweets supporting the posters and Labour's argument, so maybe we'll see more in the interviews from them showing their support later on. However, we can see briefings against the poster from different members of the shadow cabinet. A Labour insider said, quote, "My understanding is that there was a big row about before the posters came out involving the leader's office and the communications team, and so there should have been, if you're going to put out this sort of divisive material, it needed to be widely debated. Steve must be furious because this was a good policy which has been totally overshadowed by what has now become Graphicgate," end quote. So we can see that there is a fear in the party that the graphics are divisive. That instead of highlighting the Tory failures on crime, they will engulf the Labour Party because of the personal nature of the posters. It looks like maybe Starmer was torn on the poster originally, given that there are claims of a row, as mentioning above between Starmer and the comms team that this stuff should be discussed before being published. So maybe there was a mistake in publishing the poster they did. It's speculation on my part. Labour claimed to have had these posters for months and have waited for the right time to use them. This insider is claiming that this sort of poster should have been debated by the top team, at least because of the said alleged row, which makes me think this insider could be from Cooper's team. So that's why you always have to be a bit careful about briefings, because who are they briefing and why? That's the question, because they're always trying to get a specific message out. The briefings are getting pretty toxic too. A Labour insider said, quote, "This is sheer cowardice from a serial failure who should have left frontline politics long ago. If Yvette disagrees strongly with pointing out the Tories' dismal failure on record on crime, she knows where the door is. She still has delusions of being a Labour leader, but leaders don't stab people in the back," end quote. And I think this is coming from someone in Reid's team, I'll be honest. Because they see the poster as a success due to the publicity it got, and they might see Cooper as taking away from their shine. If Cooper is moved in a reshuffle, then Reid would potentially put himself up for a promotion. If Starmer thinks Reid has done a good job here, it's getting pretty toxic, and the poster has been criticised by the Labour MPs as well. I do wonder how many Labour MPs actually support it and are against it. And I'll be honest, as much as I criticise Yvette Cooper, she has absolutely lit up. She's absolutely lit up Braverman in every exchange I've seen. The only comeback Braverman really has is you're not going to be able to solve the problems, and that's not Cooper's fault. That's Starmer's fault for not giving a policy mandate. But honestly, I think Steve Reid is way more. He's a clown. He's an absolute clown. This from Kim Johnson MP, who's a Labour MP, saying, quote, "This discourse is dangerous and should have no place in our party. It is an inflammatory dog whistle which does nothing to address the serious issue of child sexual exploitation. It must be withdrawn immediately," end quote. And so that kind of sums it up. I think it's been very divisive for the Labour Party. There are members of the shadow cabinet against it, and collective responsibility exists. So if they are vehemently against it, they should really resign. But some people think their place belongs in the shadow cabinet. That's where they can do their best work. And some people are just attracted to power, like the way a fly is attracted to fire, I guess. So we're going to be talking now about Starmer doubling down. So Starmer doubled down on the poster. He said, quote, "I make absolutely zero apologies for being blunt about this. I stand by every word Labour has said on the subject, no matter how squeamish it might feel for some. When 4,500 child abusers avoid prison, people don't want more excuses from politicians. They want answers," end quote. So we've given answers on that number. But hang on, the poster said adults who sexually assault children, but here he's talking about child abusers in general. Which is a much broader thing. Maybe it's a mistake, or maybe I'm being pedantic. But Steve Reed also made a different mistake, talking about the actual crime that was committed. He spoke about child rapists, but they're conflating so many different figures together to get this 4,500 number. It's bizarre from Starmer, who was a former lawyer, and Reed, who, I don't know, maybe he was a clown in his former life. It's not just Starmer who has doubled down on this. Thornbury as well has done so. Labour keeps trying to flip the conversation onto other failures of the Tory party. Starmer focusing on other aspects of broken Britain, like the NHS. I think that's what they wanted to do, and that's what they wanted the posters to do, to shock people into seeing these numbers and thinking that the Tories, in particular Sunak, are soft on crime. Child abusers are seen as the lowest criminals, and rightfully so, hence why they started with that poster. And then they hoped to use those posters as a springboard to talk about the other issues that the Tories have failed on. And which has partially worked. As we mentioned before, the Labour Party has been given a lot more time to talk about things they wanted to talk about, like the Tories are being soft on crime, and not on the things the Tories wanted to talk about, such as the channel crossings. That seems to be the plan, and one of the insiders seems to be happy that Labour have shifted the conversation onto what they actually want to talk about. My issue is that the posters are really divisive, and they will continue to kind of consume the party, in a sense. But also, once you have shocked people into realising how bad the system is, when people inevitably ask, how do you fix this mess outside of voting for the Tories, what will Labour say? Because as we mentioned before, they have given no actual solutions. Starmer's record as CPS is being called into doubt. Thornbury claimed she does not know about the details of the meeting Starmer had at the time, and tried to deflect away from Starmer's role completely. So what Starmer did was he was on the sentencing guideline panels that set out the guidelines that have basically allowed some of these criminals to avoid jail sentences. They were there, I think, to help set the mandatory minimums. So, for Starmer to go with these attacks makes no sense. Some people have claimed that they managed to find the minutes of the specific meeting around the guidelines, but I read through the minutes of the meeting, and I'm not sure, given that there's no reference to giving certain offenders non-custodial sentences. So I don't think that's the actual minutes of the meeting. I think it was clickbait from Guaido, who thought people weren't going to click it and take their word for it. But people, when it comes to Guaido folks always check, because those guys are a bunch of clowns. Thornbury did accuse the CPS of backsliding when Starmer was in charge back in 2012, given that Starmer weakened the guidelines around specialist barristers dealing with every stage of rape prosecution. However, she did mention in that same article that the Tories cut the funding to the CPS and that victims could not get legal support. So I'm not sure if the funding cut was directly linked to the decision that Starmer made, but given how complex rape cases can be, taking away experienced barristers who have dealt with rape cases would not make sense unless Starmer felt like he had no choice but to do this because of the cuts, because of what Dominic Raab did at the time. Either he was forced to do it, or Starmer is an absolute clown. But my point is that he has opened himself up here for attacks because of his personal attacks on Sunak in the way that he has played a role in the CPS and in making the sentencing guidelines. Perhaps he made the decisions he did because of the cuts, or because he believed he made the right choices at the time. And maybe he still does. I don't know, but I hope he's asked about it. And I've been, very charitable in my defence of Starmer here. but he's left himself open to this, especially when they're using the sentencing guidelines he helped to create. And it's sad that he will be a victim to these sorts of attacks, given that he did do a lot to help child rape victims in the way that he helped restructure the CPS, and in terms of which witnesses can be seen as reliable or not. I can see both sides just throwing mud at each other and claiming that both sides are protecting some of the worst people in society. It's just sad that it's come to this, and I believe Sunak can largely counter a lot of these sorts of attacks. So we'll be talking about Sunak's possible defence. I think the Tories will go with the old, quote, he's been in charge for only a few months, end quote, excuse. That's not a really good defence, because as Chancellor he could have done a lot more to fund the CPS and the judiciary. They can blame COVID, but they had money for test and trace and all of this other stuff, and the bogus Nightingale courts that really didn't do a lot. Especially with the backlogs climbing as high as they did. And I don't think saying that the figures from 2010 are really that effective using these figures, because Sunak only became an MP in 2015. So I don't think just saying that the figures are from 2010, I wasn't in charge back then, I wasn't even elected back then, would really work. He could claim that he had not had time to deal with it, but that would hinge on people giving him a clean slate, despite being the Tory party being in charge for 13 years. 13 years. And I think what Sunak could also do is focus on the guidelines, and I think this is where it could get dangerous for Starmer. Starmer was part of the guidelines, as we mentioned before, and say that since Starmer was one of the people who created the guidelines, Starmer must be angry at himself, because some of these criminals got non-custodial sentences because I think of the guidelines that were set out, because they still use those same guidelines that Starmer was a part of. I think that would be the most effective attack. The Tories will keep claiming that they're increasing the minimum sentences for criminals and that Labour are voting against those minimum sentences, despite the fact that it's not really that true, because they keep introducing gnarly bills with bad amendments and stuff. Now, while I don't think that that is true about the minimum sentencing and all the guideline stuff, I'm sure that he's going to wheel that one out. He'll claim Labour voted against the minimum sentences. These are probably the best attacks. These would flip it on Starmer and force him to defend himself, especially on the guidelines point. I really hope we don't see him going to talk about rape gangs and the Labour Party stuff like Braverman did. This stuff is so trash. Just minority people using dog whistles against their own communities. It's just one of the weirdest and one of the worst things I think I've seen in just ages. I believe that these sorts of attack lines are possible. Possible lines Sunak will go down anyways. He'll spin the number by talking about percentage increases, making out like things are being fixed and that most of the problems in the court system were caused by COVID, lenient judges, or the guidelines that Starmer helped to make. And the problem is the court backlog before COVID was massive, was absolutely massive. So I think that the stuff that Starmer has left himself open for is not great, and I think Sunak does have some avenues to try and defend himself. So it should be quite interesting to see what he actually does. And what Labour could have done. I think Labour had other options. They weren't as cool as the posters they put out, or as snazzy, but they weren't as toxic either. If Labour wanted to focus on the judiciary, they could have focused on the wait times for cases. Some of these cases take up to 4 years to be heard. Imagine being a victim of a crime and having to wait 4 years before your case will be heard, before you can actually get therapy or anything like that. 4 years. Starmer could have focused on things like that, the wait times for rape cases, and that the Tories do not care about victims. Secret Barrister added a few, saying one could have been, quote, do you think that the victims of sexual violence should have to wait 5 years for a trial, end quote, or, quote, do you think that if you were a victim of a serious crime, it would be acceptable for your trial to be delayed 3, 4, or 5 times simply because the government won't pay enough for judges, courtrooms, or barristers, end quote. And these aren't the snappiest of arguments, but they're pretty accurate. There's a reason why my man, or sorry, not my man, I'm assuming is their gender. There's a reason why Secret Barrister works as a barrister, and I work as a 2-bit YouTube host, because we don't work in marketing. We're not spin doctors. But these focus on the victims rather than smearing someone as protecting violent criminals from prison. I don't even think the whole Rishi does not thing makes sense. Rishi doesn't think this, Rishi doesn't think that. I don't think it makes sense. You can make the argument that this is a consequence of 13 years of Tory mismanagement, but to argue on a personal level that he doesn't believe people that abuse children shouldn't go to prison, it just doesn't really fit, and I think you're attacking him at his core, which is a mistake. I know it's down to him being more popular than Starmer. That's one of the reasons they've gone down this line. But it should read as the Tories have done this. Go after the whole party, because it was all of them who did this. They keep voting to underfund legal aid. The police, social services, anything and everything that would help people. And it goes back to David Cameron, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss. All of them did this. Just like the murder on the Orient Express. They all oversaw this. They all played a part in the dismantling of the justice system. That way the attacks are less personal against the individual. That the Tories are still a bit shaky on with Sunak. They're not 100% confident with him. Blame the entire party. That way they can all be attacked, because they all did this. Every budget they passed made this inevitable. The collapse of the judicial system, the NHS, schools, the GP system, everything related to public services. The Tories broke it. The water companies are dumping so much raw sewage into the waterways. That's something you can actually blame on Sunak, because he could easily stop it. This is under his watch. The Tories are not enforcing the rules on the water companies. There is one company in the south of England that doesn't even know how much raw sewage is dumped in the waterways because it's not monitoring it. That's something he should have said. That's something that the party should have ran on. Something stinks, and that's the water, because of Sunak. But instead, the Labour Party decided to start their opening salvo with Rishi does not think child sexual assault predators should go to jail. It's a target-rich environment, against Sunak, and they still miss. They still miss. And what if the Tories replace Sunak before the election, as unlikely as it is? Are you going to use the same posters against the next person? It don't make sense. It don't make sense, I'll be honest. Final thoughts. How do I conclude this mess? I think that the first poster is a dog whistle, but somehow it's not even the worst offence. The number is inaccurate, the number on the poster, the 4,500, and it just exists for shock value. Perhaps they wanted a rounded number. But it actually achieves, for the poster to work, it needs to achieve a few things, and it requires more than this poster. They need a lot more to kind of get the full shock value of the poster. The poster has dominated the news cycle, which the nerds in the Labour Party are ecstatic about because of all the engagement they get, even though they say, oh, but we don't care about Twitter, we're talking to real people, but Twitter, we love you, really. It requires all of the shadow cabinet to toe the line, and I don't think that will happen right now, hence why the talks of a reshuffle. Cooper is very good at attacking Braverman, so if she gets moved, I'll be slightly annoyed. In fact, I would argue Yvette Cooper is the best at attacking her opposite number in Suella Braverman. Sure, she has the easiest one, because Braverman's an absolute moron and there's a plane going overhead. Hopefully that doesn't pick up too much. But I think she's the most effective member of the front bench, probably alongside Ed Miliband, I'll be honest. Labour needs, a full court press on this, a gegenpress, which I don't think will happen because the shadow cabinet is divided on these posters. But I think Labour needs an actual policy solution. One Labour advisor has said the personal attacks on Sunak won't work because, quote, we won't win from the gutter. Our biggest problem is not failing to attack Rishi, it's lacking a positive alternative vision. And because dredging up past records won't end well for Keir, the Tories will go down with his DPP record, end quote, and that's when he was in charge of prosecutions. And I'm not sure what they'll dig up, so maybe I'll do that another day. I think the main reason that they've gone down this road is because, the personal tax is to come viral and shock people, but because Labour has no other actual policies either, which makes it kind of pointless. If Starmer had a vision on how to fix the broken judiciary, then now would be the perfect time to let us know. As I mentioned, Labour doesn't want to change the sentencing guidelines, the mandatory minimums, or invest more money in prisons. When it comes to this stuff, Labour won't commit more money to fund prisons, so we can't actually have more prison spaces. So if Labour are saying that the problem is with certain criminals not going to jail is because we lack prison capacity, then surely Labour has to say we'll put up money to increase prison capacity. Or if the problem is the minimum guidelines, Labour should say we're opening to get that changed, willing to get that changed, but they're not. And I agree with the insider that Labour's biggest problem is itself. Blair offered actual policy solutions back in 1997, as did Attlee in 1945. Starmer has faced criticism over the poster from people like Marina Hyde, who's very much kind of a centrist, centre-left journalist, a Guardian columnist. The only one you'd say is radical is probably Owen Jones. Labour keeps arguing that they're listening to the voters, but for me it feels like they're desperate to land something on Sunak. When you can't beat someone in an argument, you go for personal attacks, and I think Labour have done that in a really ugly way. I guess sanity really is the price to pay for power. It's just madness that they've done this, and I think without actual policies, this stuff won't land. You know, on a personal level, the posters made me very angry. Off a weekend where I saw my boy Israel Adesanya get a big win, was really inspirational on the mic too. I was furious. But then I just felt despair with the first poster. With Labour cabinet members saying the poster has worked and more on its way, I just don't know how I feel. You know, will I be fired up to do more content on it, or will I just feel pure rage or despair? You know, I did not want to see Labour go down this road. Maybe it's unfair to expect them to be better morally than the Tories. Maybe I give the Tories too much leeway because I expect it from them. You know, stuff like the Braverman dog whistles, for example. But it's on us to be better, to do better. But you know, maybe in the end, it has to be this way, like when Ryden fought Senator Armstrong. Maybe it just has to be like this. You know, I really want to be positive about the Labour Party, I do. For anyone who thinks, oh, I'm a Tory shield, I've got news for you, Chief. You know, I've done about 1,800 videos on YouTube. You know, time does fly. The vast majority of them, I would say 90% of them, are on the Tory Party and their ineptitude. Every Brexit video, for the most part, that doesn't mention Labour is an attack on the Tories. You know, so you know, if you come at me arguing I'm a shill, you're gonna look stupid. And I'm gonna clown you in the comments. You know, and I have an obligation to myself and my audience to kind of, you know, not be, you know, I'm not a party activist or partisan. You know, like some other people are in the space. It's my job, in my opinion, to give the best, honest, objective analysis as best I can, based in good faith, with the occasional mockery and a couple of dunks on people with memes and references only I will understand. But regardless, Labour thinks my vote is a lock anyways, so they don't care about my views. You know, it's all about mortgage man, Workington man, and Stevenage woman, and all of these weird terms that they've made up.
Absolutely right to raise those issues and to do them in the way that we have, because it's caught the public's attention, which is our intention to do that, on what Rishi Sunak as the Prime Minister has responsibility for, and the 13 years of Conservative failure.
To triangulate voters. You know, Labour did not have to do this. You know, they didn't have to make these posters. They didn't have to make this personal. But I felt like this is a video I had to make. I know people will get mad about it and claim I'm a Tory shill, but unless they have actual substance-based arguments, I really don't care. You know, and if you blame me or people like me, if Labour lose the election, fine, go ahead. You know, blame me if it makes you feel better.
That's right. Don't blame yourself. Blame me.
But if you stuck around this long, I hope you understand why I made this video. But anyways, let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can. And hopefully I'll see you in the next one. This video is a lot of work. And it's kind of delayed other projects. And, you know, I don't even know if YouTube will monetize it and allow it to be kind of viewed properly, shared. Thanks for listening. I despair, but you know, this is a video I felt like I had to make. I know you'll understand.
I know you understand.